You ever notice how, in every family, whether it's your own or one you've watched from afar, there's always that one story that sticks with you? The kind of story that doesn't just fade into the background, but lingers. It whispers in the quiet moments, when you're setting the table, folding laundry, or sitting on the porch remembering how things used to be. And sometimes, those stories aren't the happy ones we'd love to have with us. Sometimes they're about heartbreak, about betrayal, about seeing something you believed would last forever fall apart right before your eyes. That's where we are today. Reflecting on a family that for decades preached to the world that they were founded on faith, on unity, on love. A family that welcomed the cameras, welcomed us all into their home, and made us believe that there could be harmony, even in the most unorthodox of situations. But beneath the smiles, beneath the productions, the carefully produced dinners, and the gracious introductions, there was a slow disintegration, a quiet tempest building, just out of reach. And if you've lived long enough, you know how those tempests are. They begin as a whisper, a faint crack in the wall, and before you know it, the entire structure starts to tremble. Now, let me ask you something. Have you ever stood by and watched someone you loved pursue something, or someone you knew would only lead to sorrow? Perhaps it was a friend who couldn't release the wrong man. Perhaps it was a sibling who continued holding on to a dream way after it had turned bitter. You sit there, observing them, praying they will wake up, but already understanding that some things cannot be learned, they must be experienced. That is what makes this tale so agonizing as well as recognizable. For this is not about a man and his wives. It's not about who received the biggest house, or who got to sit next to him on the couch, or who got to hear "I love you" whispered at night. This is about something more profound, the way favoritism taints trust, the way resentment festers when one is always elevated above all else. It's about what occurs when the family table is no longer a site of commonality and turns into a battlefield where love is doled out, piece by piece. Remember the moments in your own life when you sensed the balance tilt. Perhaps it was a parent being more affectionate with one child than with another. Perhaps it was a job where someone always seemed to be getting the raises, and the rest of you were bearing the load. You see it, you feel it in your bones, and even when you don't speak up, the quiet gnaws at you. That is what occurred here, only on display under the bright lights of television, where a million eyes could witness the fissures beginning to form. From the first whispers, you could sense something was not right. A secretly chosen dress. A honeymoon that went on far longer than anybody else ever got. Compliments being showered on one, while indifference hung like a pall over the others. These weren't mistakes. These were decisions, and decisions, as you are well aware, speak more truths than words ever can. But this is the part that makes this tale something more than a tabloid headline or a guilty pleasure reality series. It's the human component, because for every smiling victory face you witnessed on television, someone off in the corner was fighting back tears. For each second of favoritism, there was a woman asking herself what she did wrong, why her love wasn't sufficient, and how she became edited out of the script of her own marriage. And perhaps that's the most difficult to see, not the fights, not the tension, not even the betrayals, but the quiet moments of yearning that never got an explanation. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they leave? Why did they remain in such an obviously skewed, so achingly unjust situation? But if you've ever loved someone completely, loved them in the good and the bad, the promises and the broken ones, you understand it isn't always that simple. Love will tie us to locations we vowed we'd never remain. It whispers, tomorrow will be different. It tells us that one more try will finally fix it. And by the time we know it won't, years, sometimes decades, have slipped through our fingers. That's why this story is such a mirror. It's not a story about them. It's a story about us. About the times we've waited too long, trusted too much, or hoped too hard for someone who had already turned the page. And perhaps that's why so many listened, week after week, not only for the melodrama, but because beneath the tabloid headlines, there was something quintessentially relatable. A reminder that even within the most unorthodox of families, the strife is achingly familiar. So this is where we start. With a family that vowed harmony and delivered discord. With a man who said love was limitless, but kept the best of himself in reserve for one. With women who gave years of devotion, only to be set aside and muzzled. And with children caught in the middle, who had to try and make sense of a world where love was conditional, meted out like prizes from a carnival booth. As we walk into this tale together, I want you to consider your own life. The ones who lifted you up, the ones who let you down, the times when you felt seen and the times when you were invisible. Because although the names and faces in this place may be from a reality show, the feelings are universal. They echo something every single one of us has ever felt at one point or another. And maybe that's why it's important. Because if you take away the cameras and the contracts, the show and the spectacle, you're left with something deeply human. The pursuit of love, the threat of abandonment, and the soft hope that maybe, just maybe, we're better than whatever scraps someone chooses to offer us. So settle in. Pour yourself a cup of coffee, or maybe a glass of something stronger. Because this isn't just a recap. It's a story of love gone wrong, of loyalty misplaced, and of what happens when the truth can no longer be hidden. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how it all comes undone. You see, when you actually look at it, Meri wasn't merely another wife here. She identified with so much of her life with Cody. And here's the thing. Meri isn't really the victim people sometimes paint her to be. Really, she engineered her own wretchedness. She spent years playing at being Cody's faithful messenger, his de facto secretary, running back and forth to him for reports on what the others were saying. Consider season 19, for instance. Janelle shares something intimate about guarding herself. And what does Meri do? Walk straight back to Cody with the gossip. Like it's her job. That's been her job. The entire time, tattletale, lapdog, the one always waiting for Cody to appreciate her loyalty. You can almost picture her saying, "Cody, guess what I overheard?" After every single conversation. But honestly, this dysfunction isn't new. For more than 30 years, the wives weren't so much forming a bond with one another as they were competing for Cody's affections. And Cody, he loved it. He established himself as the center of the family, and each wife was a spoke, ensuring everything was about him and not about them. And it was working, at least temporarily. So it's little wonder that Meri would take Cody's side against Janelle. On a level, the system was set up that way. Nevertheless, the hypocrisy is impossible to avoid. Janelle hadn't had any contact with Meri for over a year, and then all of a sudden she appears, being so concerned. But let's be real, that concern was actually about herself. She was also in the midst of a battle over property with Cody, and she needed Meri's compliance to bolster her position. And she knew exactly what she was doing. Janelle essentially banked on Meri returning to Cody. If Cody believed an alliance was brewing, perhaps he'd negotiate rather than string things out. That's the thing. Meri's reliability made her useful, but useful doesn't always equate to sympathetic. Throughout the years, Meri became the go-to flying monkey of Cody and Robyn, always telling herself she wasn't taking sides while in practice serving them nearly solely. Meri's devotion to Cody was so intense that self-respect didn't materialize until much later. And even so, half-heartedly. And let's get real. If Cody ever snapped his fingers and vowed to divide his time between her and Robyn, many of us have no doubt Meri would run back. And here's the irony. Meri gripes about being alone, yet she contributed heavily to the walls that have gone up around her. Christine, Janelle, Robyn, Cody, and even most of the children have withdrawn from her. That quiet speaks volumes. People stop believing in you when you cannot keep secrets. And Meri's constant gossiping poisoned the family to her. Now, don't get me wrong. Janelle isn't some saint here either. For years, she was fine with the inequities Meri endured, both in property and affection. Only when those same inequities landed on her doorstep did she decide the whole system was broken. Suddenly, Meri became important, not as a friend, but as a tool. And don't forget, the grand over-the-top conversation we witnessed. That could have been a 2-minute phone call. The fact that it was taped speaks volumes. It wasn't about addressing problems. It was about generating plot nuggets. And of course, true to form, Meri played her role once more, running intel back to Cody, hoping for some scrap of meaning. If she ever wonders why her family avoids her, the truth isn't hidden. It's staring back at her in the mirror. Loyalty has to be earned, not begged for. And Meri's blind devotion to Cody has left her with no husband, no allies, and very little dignity. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. Meri not only survives this anarchy, she appears to thrive on it, particularly when Christine is the one suffering. Repeatedly, Meri has discovered a twisted pleasure in Christine's anguish. Since the early seasons of the show, you could catch her beaming whenever Christine stumbled, as if Christine's agony legitimized her own role. Do you recall when Robyn came to live with the family? Christine was obviously ill at ease, and Meri's response, well, it was more or less a smirk. As if she were thinking, at last, someone else has some idea about feeling outside. And in a certain measure, you can see why she'd relish it. For years, Meri had been subjected to jealousy, rejection, and emotional exile at Cody's hands. At the same time, to the outside world, Christine appeared to be cruising happily along in a solid marriage. But with Robyn's arrival, Christine broke apart, and Meri, who had been observing from the sidelines, at last witnessed the mighty fall. Was it mean-spirited of her to take some pleasure in that moment? Guilty as charged. Was it unexpected? Not in the slightest. In this family, schadenfreude wasn't merely accepted. It was all but the family sport. Cody, always the puppet master, lived for keeping the wives in a state of imbalance. Consider that infamous tale from prior to filming. He spent money on Christmas presents for Janelle and Christine, but skipped Meri altogether. That wasn't an oversight. That was a tactical move. He was, much like that high school quarterback, savoring the anarchy of girls sparring over him. Cody employed preferential treatment as a tool. The outcome? A cult-like social structure with brutality not being a coincidence. It was the adhesive which bound it all together. Meri, on the other hand, leaned into bitterness as a means of survival. Janelle had once told a therapist, "Meri likes when people are unhappy." That wasn't really news. It was merely a bitter truth spoken aloud. And then there was Meri's response to Cody's notoriety for what he liked to call the knife in the kidneys speech he gave Christine. She didn't merely observe, she approved. She even confessed to being happy that Christine needed to hear it. Not exactly the image of a supportive sister wife. But here's the thing. The sanctification of Christine, the queen of plexus, the face of girl power, distorts the story. Christine wasn't always an innocent victim. She belittled, dismissed, and mocked Meri whenever she could, particularly once she saw that there were no repercussions. Calling Robyn baggage would have been unthinkable when Cody still loved Christine. But to do it to Meri, that was safe sport. The truth is both women lived off the other's mistakes. Christine wanted to be the last wife partially, so she would not have to suffer as Meri had for years. And when Christine finally snapped and left, Meri might not have been pleasant to be around, but she was tough. And yes, she did take some pleasure in Christine's defeat. Petty? Sure enough. Human? Guaranteed. And that hypocrisy doesn't stop there. Christine was done with Meri years before the cameras started rolling, and still she took Meri's money and childcare assistance. If Meri was really such a poisonous pariah, why was she relying on her purse and elbow grease? Because in this family, principles were flexible when expediency demanded it. So yes, Meri scoffed at Christine's misery. But faking like Christine never sharpened her own claws on Meri, that's rewriting history. The reality is that the two women were mirrors of each other's meanness. Only Christine's stings were termed sassy, whereas Meri's were branded bitter. The double standard isn't difficult to discern. In the end, Meri didn't create the dysfunction. She just played by the rules that already existed. And if she relished watching Christine finally get some of her own medicine, well, who can really criticize her? In the Brown family, spite was not a weakness. It was the currency. And then Robyn. She wasn't victimized by the sister wives. She was their designer. When she came into the family, the writing was on the wall. She and Cody wished for a clean slate from the previous life, and from the original 13 children, who would not orbit around her. Consider the purchase of Coyote Pass. It was not about making a future together. It was about siphoning off resources from the homes of the other wives. Building was never an objective. Accumulation of riches was. Love had little to do with it. What was important was to shed the baggage of 3 wives and children, and create a new bright nuclear family in which Robyn could rule without opposition. And really, to attribute some master plan to Cody might even be too kind. Perhaps it wasn't that deliberate, but the impact was the same. Cody's history makes one thing fairly certain. He believed his wives would continue to enable him indefinitely. Why would he alter a configuration that kept him loved, unchecked, and able to do whatever he wanted? The only true hitch was finances. If he had just said he wanted to shed the original wives and children, child support alone would have bankrupted him. So instead, he played a more calculated game. Keep the show going. Toss the wives an occasional few crumbs to keep them thinking that they still had some importance. And most importantly, continue to keep them all paying into the group purse. That way he received the benefits without the complete responsibility. But eventually things changed. With truly being the youngest child he had to provide for, the financial weight virtually vanished. And Robyn? Her aspirations had been defined from the beginning. She gained legal marriage to secure her spot, bore children with Cody to solidify her status, and channeled enough finances to ensure her comfort. By the time all of that was in place, the other wives were no longer assets. They were irritations. The show money continued to arrive, and Robyn, always the opportunist, had mastered the life she desired. Insulated, resourced, and free of competition. That dream of a single harmonious family. Always on the condition. What Robyn really wanted was center stage alone. Queen wife, queen mother, with her children feted as favorites. And when the older kids failed to comply, she became vengeful. Consider her resentment towards Hunter. Or how she manipulated Aspen's words into fantastical slurs. Or the unending game of victimology. None of that was an accident. That was strategy, part of a consistent cleansing of anyone who refused to bow down. And let's be honest, the future looks all too predictable. The oversized mansion, the sky-high mortgage, the shrinking goodwill. It all points to financial collapse. A bankruptcy filing would wipe the slate clean, setting Robyn up for the next act. Her inevitable memoir, a tragic tale of how she too was one of Cody's victims. But here's the irony, being alone with Cody doesn't exactly flatter her ambitions. She was never evidently head over heels in love with him. It wasn't Cody himself that excited her. What excited her was observing him. Ignore 3 wives for her. Conquering one man from another woman is shallow victory. Conquering one man from 3 women. That was validation. And now the validation is stripped away. And the win is empty. It may only be a couple of years, maybe less, before she tires of her prize, takes her share and makes her exit. From the start, Robyn's goals were clear. Legal status, the largest house, the privileged children, and wives begging for morsels of Cody's attention. What she came away with instead was an empty kingdom, and a husband with nothing to reign over. Robyn Brown didn't rescue the Brown family. She tore it apart, piece by piece. And yet, for one who claims to be full of dreams, Robyn managed to bypass the chapter on logic. Her fantasy of 4 wives growing old together, like sisters on Coyote Pass, children returning for holidays, and a harmonious polygamous utopia was never based on reality. It apparently never crossed her mind that the wives would ever grow weary of being extras in her dream and just walk away. And when they did, she appeared truly stunned by the collapse. Even her children started drifting away. At one time, she confessed that her children didn't even know who their siblings were. That dream house she dreamed of became more like a mausoleum than a home where people came together. And then there's her money sense, or lack thereof. Robyn wanted to purchase houses with a room for every child, even as her 3 eldest were in their early 20s. By that time, most children can double up, or preferably set up their own place. Guest bedrooms for relatives visiting. That wasn't in her equation. Scaling back once the McMansion phase was over. Forget it, if anything she upgraded, opting for a palace that appeared to be built for kids who would never come back, and for vacations that would never occur. The fact that the show money will eventually run out does not appear to bother her one bit. When it does, the entire delicate kingdom can collapse. You can almost visualize it. That huge cavernous house, with only 3 permanent dwellers. Robyn, Cody, and a cleaning team. Because come on, neither one of them looks like they're going to be mopping baseboards in 6,000 square feet of rooms. And the irony goes on and on. Robyn entered the marriage with lots of debt and a humble upbringing, but the minute she walked in the door, she insisted on living the life of royalty. Abruptly, her children couldn't possibly be expected to share a room, as if the concept of compromise was beneath her. What she did manage, and soon enough arranged for, was the lion's share of Cody's time, energy, and resources. And why? Because she possessed the one commodity Cody valued above all, a knack for playing the perpetual victim. He fell for it hook, line, and sinker. The man who never moved a hand in his other wives' kitchens was suddenly loading dishes into Robyn's sink and putting her children to bed like the world's most dedicated stepfather. The rest of the family, however, was not fooled. Robyn's insecurities spilled out, particularly in the COVID years, as she said the same line of anxious words over and over again. Are you sure you feel it's safe? Translation: if it wasn't for Robyn's interests, it wasn't safe. And then there is Meri's sacrifice. She consented to a legal divorce, so that Cody could marry Robyn and provide her with that coveted legal status. Right from the beginning, the goal was obvious. Robyn desired the crown of favorite wife, the large house, and the position of queen mother where everyone else would pay respects. She got the first two, for sure, but the third, the family flat out denied. Rather than concentrating power, Robyn and Cody found themselves disconnected, while the others drew closer in their stead. The actual drama, however, will be when the cameras turn off. The shopping allowances will dwindle. The limelight will dim, and that fantasy life might resemble a whole lot more like a money nightmare. In all honesty, seeing Robyn and Cody attempt to survive reality sans TLC sponsorship might be the most entertaining page of their book so far. Now, let's get to Meri. By season 16 of Sister Wives, what we witness is really her masterclass in embarrassing yourself on national TV. Her narrative by then reduced to one pathetic, persistent theme: a woman holding on to the possibility of a man who had very publicly and very repeatedly spurned her. Each scene appeared to be singing the same refrain: Meri pining for Cody to come by, pay attention to her, give even the slightest glimmer of affection. It wasn't subtle, it was incessant, and honestly it was cringe-worthy to watch. You couldn't help but wonder, was this her actual emotional breakdown or was this a TLC-crafted narrative? Because by then, Meri had nothing else to bring to the show. Her sole offspring had stepped out of the glare, her connections to the other wives had been cut, and Cody, the final strand binding her to the show, had all but eliminated her from his world. The unfortunate reality is that her sole purpose was scrounging for leftovers. And to compound the problem, Robyn put her own spin on manipulation, calming Meri with nicely timed reassurances. Cody talks about you. You should hang on. It was gaslighting perfection, stringing Meri along as Robyn basked in the role of the much-loved wife. At the same time, Cody spun lies like a professional. A tale for Meri in secret, another for the camera crew, and another for the other wives. He had the temerity to give Meri a checklist of behaviors she'd have to maintain in order to win his love again, as if love were a reward she could compete on by sheer grit. And then the last straw. Meri's mom, Bonnie, died. Bonnie was a definite supporter of Cody, always pushing Meri to work things out and keep trying. Without her voice in her ear, for the first time, Meri finally started inching towards freedom. Meri never lost the hope that Cody would eventually come back to her. You could see it in every glance, every word, every hesitation. She was anticipating that moment when he'd finally give her a glimmer of the love she used to know. Their relationship was always a loop of fights and makeup, and Meri was certain another makeup was imminent, but it never happened. Of all 4 wives, Meri perhaps loved Cody most. And it was precisely that which made his aloofness towards her hurt so much harder. She'd gaze at him with eyes brimming over with ardor, and he'd glance off, already preoccupied with his next new thing. Cody has ever prioritized novelty over commitment, new playthings over those which had stood by him all along. To him, Meri was no longer novel, just background. In retrospect, Meri's greatest folly was the divorce. By surrendering that legal tie, she relinquished the sole shred of bargaining power she possessed. Had she remained Cody's legal wife, she could have settled for half of everything: previous profits, future gains, even her fair share of the family inheritance. At the very least, she could have made him deal with the consequences of his decisions, rather than letting the divorce serve as a convenient excuse to marry Robyn and take on her children. Instead, she relinquished her power, and in the process, gave Cody and Robyn everything they desired. The image we're left with is poignant. A woman who cared deeply but made choices that only served to compromise her further. Her commitment was real, but her game plan wasn't. Her place in the family now hangs on a salary, not on an equality. And that's the saddest thing, because you can't help but want Meri to find someone who has some respect for her. Cody never will. And then, of course, there is Robyn's wedding. Be honest, the most repugnant aspect of it wasn't the dress itself. It was what the dress said about Cody. His self-satisfied little moment of discovery. "I chose the dress" wasn't a nice romantic moment. No, that was a statement. It was Cody making a point to everyone. Robyn was special, and he wasn't ashamed to admit it. The entire narrative was a disaster. Robyn and Cody were shopping together one moment, and she was shopping with the other wives the next, before saying she needed to keep both memories intact. Either TLC got the timeline confused, or did it all for show. Neither makes a significant difference. The significance is in the symbolism. The dress drama wasn't about lace or fabric. It was about favoritism. Cody was spoiling Robyn in ways he hadn't with the others. Keep in mind, this is the same Cody who hardly lifted a finger for his other wives' weddings. Sure, he was a little attentive to Meri, but that was because this was his first marriage, and he was caught up in the newness of it all. With Robyn, however, it was different. He enjoyed the preferential treatment, hours-long drives just to look at her, an 11-day honeymoon, and of course, that specially selected dress. He boasted about it, so when he beamed, saying, "I picked the dress," it was like I'd seen it in my dreams. It wasn't romance, it was provocation. He knew the other wives would hear it, especially Christine, who had long called out his blatant bias. And sure enough, they felt the sting. The actual insult wasn't the buy. It was the secrecy. If Cody had just signed off on a budget, nobody would have batted an eye. But no, he and Robyn played it like a play, pretending the group dress shopping trip meant something when the decision had already been made. It was all show, just to keep the wives smiling for the cameras. While Cody made it plain, Robyn was the exception. You've probably seen this pattern before. Cody gets angry, then quickly tries to smooth it over with endless compliments about his sweet, tender wife. But by that point, no amount of sugarcoating could hide what everyone else already knew. The favoritism wasn't accidental. It was baked into the plan from the very beginning. And let's be real, the only really consistent thing about Robyn Brown is just how insufferable she can be. She tends to argue that others don't get her, but the misunderstanding might actually be hers, thinking that her acting actually works on people. Take away the shaking voice, the over-the-top pauses, the strategically placed box of tissues, and what do you have left? A lady who appears to conduct life as an extended audition. Have you noticed? The action is near brilliant in its accuracy. The tissue materializes at just the right moment, her face contorts into a grief mask, but somehow, not a single tear is shed. And meanwhile, she goes on saying the same thing. She never aspired to be the favorite, but there she is, happily accustomed to the part, making no effort to level the playing field. And truly, why should she? Every perk goes her way. Her children first, her desires respected, her opinion always needing to have the most say. Of course, Cody has been her perfect partner to this act. He's always had a knack for playing off the insecurities of each wife, adjusting his domination like an actor running through various lines for various parts. But along came reality show celebrity. That limelight wore down his self-created world, and all of a sudden, his stunts didn't quite work anymore. By the time Christine walked out, the script had totally unraveled. Cody drew every tricksy ploy he could muster, at one point actually threatening her with the possibility that the state would take Truly away from her. But Christine flinched not an inch. She had done her research, probably had lawyers' advice, and she faced him down in a steady, calm strength. Seeing her shut down his tantrums was one of those occasional gratifying moments where you could practically feel the power dynamic shift. In the meantime, Robyn continued to grasp at her cover, clutching that tissue box as if it were part of a school play costume. While other wives later recognized the scam for what it truly was, she doubled her efforts, claiming sincerity. The more she struggled to appear genuine, however, the more transparent the facade became. In the end, the irony is hard to miss. The family fell apart, Cody lost his grip, and Christine walked away stronger than ever. And yet Robyn stayed frozen in character, still playing the part of the misunderstood favorite wife. So if you're looking for the safest seat in this drama, it's probably not on Robyn's couch.